Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like on this video, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Now, let's get into the story. I used to think betrayal looked obvious, lipstick on a collar. A late-night text you weren't meant to see, an excuse that didn't quite fit. I never imagined mine would look like a wedding photo. My wedding photo. Smiles frozen in time, my husband standing tall in his tux, me in white lace, and my bridesmaid, my closest friend since college, holding her husband's hand just a few steps away. That picture should have been the start of my happily ever after. Instead, it became the crime scene of my marriage. My name is Claire. I was 28 when I married Daniel. We'd been together for 4 years, and everyone said we were the couple that made sense. He was stable, funny in a subtle way, and completely different from the wild, reckless guys I had dated in my early 20s. He grounded me. My friends told me I glowed around him. I believed my bridesmaid, Emily, was my person. We met freshman year at the University of Michigan, bonded over late-night coffee and disastrous boyfriends. When she met her husband, Ryan, a tall, quiet guy with an easy smile, I was happy for her. We double dated, we spent weekends at each other's apartments, we built the kind of friendship where the lines between families blurred. Emily was the sister I chose. Having her stand beside me on my wedding day felt natural. The day itself was everything I thought it should be. We danced until my feet ached, we cut the cake, we kissed under the twinkling lights while our friends cheered. I remember looking over at Emily and Ryan at one point, thinking, we'll be growing old together, raising kids who play in the same backyard, celebrating anniversaries side by side. That was the picture in my head. I wish I could go back and tell that version of me that the people she trusted most would be the ones to shatter her. At first, the changes in Daniel were small. A work trip that went a day longer than planned. A new gym routine that seemed more about escape than fitness. His phone turned face down on the counter. I didn't think much of it. Marriage, I told myself, has seasons. Maybe we were just in a dry one. Then came the glances. Little things I wasn't supposed to notice. The way Daniel's eyes lingered a second too long when Ryan came over to watch football. The way their laughter had a private rhythm, inside jokes I wasn't part of. I brushed it off as friendship. Men can bond, I told myself. Isn't that what I wanted? For Daniel to have strong connections beyond me, but the unease grew. I'd catch Emily watching them, her expression unreadable. She'd cover it quickly with a smile, but something about it gnawed at me. I thought maybe I was projecting, being jealous of the closeness between our husbands. I told myself stories to explain away the tightening in my chest. One night, while Emily and I were in the kitchen pouring wine, Daniel and Ryan sat on the couch across the room, heads bent close together over something on Ryan's phone. They laughed quietly, like teenagers sharing a secret. I froze mid-pour. Emily must have seen my face because she reached out, touched my wrist, and said, "They're probably just talking about the game." Her voice was calm, but her eyes avoided mine. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But somewhere deep down, I already knew. That night in bed, Daniel turned away from me before I could kiss him goodnight. I stared at the back of his head, at the curve of his shoulder, and felt something cold settle in my chest. A distance had opened up between us, one I couldn't close with whispered I love yous or morning coffee. Still, I tried. I planned date nights. I cooked his favorite meals. I reached for him, hoping he'd reach back. But with every passing week, his body was in our apartment, while his mind, and maybe his heart, was somewhere else. I didn't yet know where or with whom, but I was about to find out. I didn't set out to become a detective. I just wanted my marriage back. But when you start noticing, you can't unnotice. The human brain is a terrible archivist. It keeps everything you'd rather throw away, labels it in neat little folders, and waits for the day you finally open the drawer. The first rail file came from a smell. Not perfume, not lipstick, not anything from the cliches I thought I understood. It was cologne, something woodsy and unfamiliar, clinging to Daniel's hoodie after he got back from a late workout. I asked if someone at the gym had sprayed half a bottle in the locker room. He shrugged and said, probably, with that soft, unbothered tone he used when he needed me to stop thinking. The second file came from the gym itself. I drove by after work to surprise him with smoothies, a silly, domestic gesture to remind us both we still lived inside the same story. He wasn't there. His app said he'd completed a 90-minute session. My eyes said the parking lot hadn't seen his car. I held the smoothies until the ice melted into sweet water and poured them into the sink when I got home. When Daniel walked in later, damp hair, hoodie on, he kissed my temple and thanked me for being patient with the schedule. I stared at the clump of laundry in his bag and saw a receipt peeking out. The logo wasn't the gym's. It was from a boutique hotel downtown, the kind with velvet stools and a bar that tries to be anonymous and fails. I didn't ask, not that night. Sometimes questions are just invitations for prettier lies. Emily came by the next day with a bottle of wine and that practiced brightness she uses when she's bracing for impact. We sat on the balcony, the city humming under us, and she told me Ryan had been off lately. Working late. Going on runs without his GPS, which was a running joke because Ryan is the kind of man who tracks his heart rate to the second. She laughed when she said it, but her eyes were raw around the edges. Do you ever feel like you're in the same room with someone and still miss them? She asked. All the time, I said. The words tasted like I'd borrowed them from a stranger. We didn't say the thing that both of us were thinking, because if we said it, we'd have to live with it. We cleaned up the glasses, hugged a little too hard, and promised to do brunch soon like couples in TV shows. She left a sweater draped over the back of a chair, and I stared at it for an hour, like it might tell me what I didn't want to learn. Then there was the party. A Friday night at a friend's loft, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs, the kind of place where people act like their lives are curated. Daniel stood near the window with Ryan, shoulders tilted toward each other, drinks barely touched. I watched them from across the room and realized I knew my husband's flirting face. I'd just never seen it aimed at someone who looked back the same way. It wasn't exaggerated. It was micro. The smile that hovers and doesn't land. The way a hand lifts, then finds a pocket instead of a shoulder. The pause before a laugh, like both of them are inside the same unspoken joke. I took my drink to the bathroom not because I had to, but because the mirror would force me to decide whether I trusted what I saw. In that harsh, overhead light, I looked like a woman who still wanted this to be a misunderstanding. I splashed water on my wrists, the way my mother taught me when panic tries to crawl up your throat. When I came out, Daniel and Ryan were gone. Emily was near the kitchen, eyes darting across the room like she'd lost something small and critical. We found them on the back fire escape, not touching, but closer than men stand when they're just talking about sports or work. Their conversation stopped when they saw us. Ryan asked Emily if she was ready to go. Daniel slipped his hands into his pockets like a kid about to be caught. At home, Daniel showered and climbed into bed like nothing had happened. I lay awake and listened to the clock in the living room count the seconds. Neither of us were brave enough to fill. The thing about suspicion is that it builds muscle memory. I started noticing the patterns. Daniel's phone, face down, always. The way he'd turn his body slightly away from me when he texted. The new habit of taking calls on the balcony with the door pulled almost closed. Once, I caught a reflection in the glass, his smile soft, voice lower, the kind of voice you use when you're being careful with something breakable. I told myself I wasn't going to snoop. I was going to ask. I waited for the right moment. Because we tell ourselves stories about the right moment when what we really want is to cushion the fall. It came on a Sunday morning. Sun through the blinds, coffee in hand, the kind of quiet that used to feel like home. Are you happy? I asked him, keeping my voice small so it could fit into the space between us. He looked startled, then cautious. With us? Of course. With me? With our life? He smiled, too quickly. Yeah, Claire. I love you. I nodded, because that's what you do when someone hands you the answer you're supposed to want. Are you seeing someone? I asked. He flinched, just a ripple. No, are you in love with someone? He exhaled, rubbed his jaw, stared at the window. You're asking the wrong question. I didn't know what the right one was until 2 days later. It happened because of a calendar. I was on the iPad adding a dentist appointment when a notification flashed for Daniel's Apple ID, a reminder set for downtown, R. It wasn't a name, just an initial, but my body reacted. Before my brain could rationalize. My mouth went dry. My fingers hovered. I clicked deeper than I should have, the way you press a bruise just to make sure it still hurts. The reminder linked to a note. It wasn't a love letter. It was logistics, parking garage level, room number, the door code for the boutique hotel. I already knew too well from a crumpled receipt. I sat there, heart thudding, and felt like the air had been siphoned from the room. The note wasn't proof of anything except presence, but presence is enough when the person you love is supposed to be present with you. I didn't confront him that night. I called Emily instead. Are you free tomorrow? I asked, and I heard the caution slide into her voice, like she was stepping onto a floor she wasn't sure would hold. We met at a cafe around the corner from the hotel. I ordered tea because coffee would have made my hands shake. She ordered a muffin and didn't touch it. We talked about work, about her mother's back surgery, about anything that would allow us to sit with the real thing without looking it in the eye. Then I said it. Do you think our husbands are having an affair with each other? The world didn't end. It narrowed. Emily's face didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Then something inside her unclenched and collapsed at the same time. I think so, she said. We didn't cry. We didn't gasp. We sat there like two women at a bus stop we never planned to visit, waiting for a vehicle we weren't sure we wanted to board. How long? I asked. I don't know, she said. I found a message on Ryan's iPad in December. It was careful. Nothing explicit. But the care was the point. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, and the question came out with more heat than I intended, because I thought if I said it out loud, I'd make it true, she whispered. And because I hoped I was wrong. We looked at each other and understood we were on the same side of a line we never wanted to cross. We made a plan. Not a trap. Just the dignity of clarity. At 6 that evening, the calendar said Daniel had a late meeting. Ryan had told Emily the same. We parked 2 blocks from the hotel and walked like we were going to a movie we weren't sure would be any good. The lobby smelled like grapefruit and money. The bar glowed with that dim gold that makes everyone look like a secret. We took the elevator to the 4th floor and stood outside a door with a code Emily had memorized off Ryan's phone when he left it on the dresser. Are you ready? She asked. No, I said. But I'm going to be. She typed the code. The green light blinked. The lock clicked. We opened the door. Sometimes the world has the decency to blur. This time, it did not. The room was too neat, too curated. Navy throw, brass lamp, the skyline stitched across the window. Daniel and Ryan were by the window, not in some cliché tangle, but holding each other like men who had been starving and finally allowed to eat. It was quiet. No frantic scrambling, no guilty theatrics. Just a startled inhale from Daniel, a hand flying to his mouth, and Ryan stepping in front of him like a shield. I don't know what my face did. All I remember is a sensation like my body had stayed in the hallway and the rest of me had stepped into a different temperature. Emily made a sound I've never heard before, half laugh, half sob, and then nothing. Silence swallowed the room. Ryan said, like her name was the answer to a question he wished someone else would ask. Daniel said my name like a prayer and a warning at once. I looked at him and understood a cruel mercy. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. I don't remember crossing the room, but I remember the view, the city beautiful and indifferent. How long? I asked Daniel. He wiped at his face with the heel of his hand. Since last fall. Did you ever plan to tell me? He looked at the carpet. I planned to stop. The honesty landed like a door closing on my foot. Emily stared at Ryan like she could anchor him with her eyes alone. Were you going to tell me? She asked. He swallowed. I don't know. We stood there, for people in a room too small for the amount of history we just dragged into it. I expected rage. Instead, what came over me was the precise clarity of a weather report. Conditions, broken. Forecast, change. I won't be your alibi anymore, I said to Daniel. My voice came out steady, like it had borrowed a backbone from somewhere I didn't know I had. If you love him, say it out loud and let me go. If you don't, then stop lying and do the work of losing whatever this is. He reached for me and let his hand fall halfway. I love you, he said. I also, he didn't finish, because the truth doesn't always fit into sentences. Emily stepped back, as if distance could reassemble the floor. We need to leave, she said, to me, to herself, to the version of her life that had just ended. I nodded. We turned to the door. Daniel took a step forward. Ryan touched his wrist and stopped him, not unkindly. For a second I saw them as they must see each other, two men who found a mirror they didn't expect and mistook it for I in the hall. Emily leaned her head against the wall and laughed a tiny, broken sound that immediately turned to tears. I wrapped my arms around her and felt her shake. What do we do? She asked. We go home, I said. We breathe. Tomorrow we make lists. Back in our apartment, the wedding photo still sat on the bookshelf, all of us trapped in our lines, smiling at a future that didn't exist. I took it down. Not an explosion, just a small correction. I put it face down in a drawer and closed it gently, as if quiet could change what it contained. Daniel came home after midnight and slept on the couch, the way people do when they finally tell the truth by accident. I lay in our bed and stared at the ceiling until the branches outside scribbled morning across the wall. I wasn't sure what the next chapter would be, but I knew this: denial had left the building. And without denial, even heartbreak has a shape you can learn to hold. The next day would be for decisions. Tonight, I let the floor stop moving under my feet. I let myself grieve the map I'd been carrying. And for the first time since the wedding, I could finally see the terrain. The morning after that hotel room felt like standing in the wreckage of a house I had lived in my whole life. Nothing looked broken at first glance, but every surface was ash. Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched. His eyes were swollen, his hair uncombed, like sleep had refused to claim him. I wanted to scream, to throw the mug against the wall, to demand explanations that could never make sense. Instead, I pulled out a chair across from him and sat down. Because part of me still wanted to hear what he would say if I gave him the chance. I never meant for it to go this far, he whispered. I laughed, sharp and bitter. You don't trip and fall into a hotel room, Daniel. You walked there. Again and again. He flinched, but didn't argue. I was confused. I didn't know what it meant, what I was feeling. I still don't know. That was when I realized how deep the wound was, not just the betrayal, but the fact that he was still hiding behind confusion, even when the truth stood in the open. You didn't just cheat on me, I said. You cheated with the husband of my best friend. Do you even understand what that means? You burned 2 marriages, not 1. Tears ran down his face, but I didn't move to wipe them. That instinct, the one that used to tether me to him, was gone. Later that day, Emily and I met again, this time at her apartment. Ryan had moved into a hotel, ironically, not the one where it all happened. She looked hollow, like someone had scooped out her insides and left the shell standing. We didn't talk about them at first. We talked about groceries, about the noise from the upstairs neighbor, about nothing. But then the silence pressed too hard, and she asked me, "Do you think they love each other?" The question stole my breath. I didn't know. Maybe they did. Maybe it was lust dressed up as something more. Maybe it was a secret they mistook for salvation. All I knew was that whatever it was, it had cost us everything. I don't care if they love each other, I finally said. I just know I can't love him anymore. Her lips trembled. Me either. We sat there, 2 women whose weddings had once been fairy tales, now reduced to footnotes in the same cruel story. There was some comfort in not being alone in the devastation, but it was the kind that doesn't heal. It only reminds you that your pain has company. That night, I went home, packed a bag, and left Daniel asleep on the couch. I drove to my sister's house and slept in her guest room, curled under a blanket that smelled like fabric softener and safety. For the first time in months, I woke up without waiting for the sound of his footsteps or the vibration of a phone face down on the table. The betrayal still lived inside me, sharp and heavy, but the air felt cleaner. I wasn't waiting for answers anymore. I had all I needed, the truth, ugly and undeniable, and even though it broke me, that truth also set me free. I used to replay the hotel door clicking open like a loop I couldn't escape. Now it's quieter. The sound still exists, but it doesn't control the room. After a week at my sister's, I went back to the apartment with a notebook, a roll of trash bags, and the kind of calm that comes when there's nothing left to negotiate. Daniel wasn't there. I packed deliberately, documents, jewelry, the mugs we bought in Savannah, the quilt my grandmother stitched the winter I was born. I left the wedding china. I left the framed picture from our first Christmas and took the frame apart just to keep the photo of my dad holding our cat. Grief teaches you what is yours, Daniel texted that afternoon asking if we could talk like adults. I said yes and chose a coffee shop with bright light and nowhere to hide. He arrived in a gray hoodie, eyes rimmed with red, haircut too short like he tried to reset himself with clippers. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We opened our laptops and made a list. Lease. Utilities. Storage unit. Car insurance. The language of an ending isn't poetry, it's bullet points. He told me he was seeing a therapist. He didn't say the word love, not about me, not about Ryan. I didn't ask him for it. I asked for honesty and a clean exit. I won't be cruel, I said. But I will be clear. He nodded like the word clear had finally found him. With Emily, the conversations were different. There were nights we ordered Thai and watched shows we didn't have to follow. There were mornings we sent each other small victories by text. Ate breakfast, slept 6 hours, didn't check his Instagram. We went to a Saturday divorce clinic at the courthouse, fluorescent lights, bad coffee, a volunteer lawyer who spoke gently and didn't flinch when people's voices shook. We sat in the back row and took notes like we were studying for a test we hadn't wanted to take. When the lawyer said, "This isn't about winning, it's about getting your life back," I underlined the sentence twice. I started measuring progress in ordinary ways. I changed my email password. I blocked a hotel number that kept calling. By mistake. I ran along the river path with a playlist I made in college, legs burning, lungs opening. I bought a second-hand dresser, sanded it on my sister's patio, and painted it the exact color of a storm clearing. I took the wedding rings to a jeweler and asked him to melt them into a thin, simple band, no stones, no inscription. For me, I said, and he didn't need more explanation. There were setbacks. The first time I saw Daniel and Ryan together at a neighborhood market, my body remembered before my brain did. I froze by a stack of peaches like a person practicing stillness. They didn't see me. I watched the way Daniel leaned toward him, a posture I knew like my own hand. The ache was real, but it didn't level me. Pain arrived, did its work, and left. That felt like a miracle disguised as an errand. My mother asked if I hated him. I told her hate is too heavy to carry and too blunt to use. What I felt was cleaner, a refusal. I refused to be the soft place he landed while he learned a truth at my expense. I refused to make myself small to make his story tidy. I refused to perform forgiveness on a timeline that wasn't mine. When the papers were ready, I signed them alone at the dining table in my sister's kitchen. The pen shook on the first page and steadied on the second. I thought about the girl in white lace, about promises spoken under twinkling lights, about the smell of frosting and the flash of cameras catching a world that didn't exist yet. I didn't resent her for believing. She got me this far. Emily finalized her own separation a week later. We met at a diner off the highway, the kind with neon that hums and pancakes that arrive bigger than your plate. We toasted with coffee. Because sometimes survival tastes like burnt edges and syrup. "We're okay," she said, surprised to hear herself tell the truth. "We're okay," I echoed, and felt it land. I moved into a small one-bedroom with windows that get reckless. Morning sun. The landlord apologized for the creaky hardwood. I told him I liked floors that talk back. I hung new curtains, set the storm-colored dresser against the wall, put a plant by the window and promised not to forget it. On my first night, I opened the window and let the city noise be the lullaby. I slept without dreaming. People ask what I learned, like pain is a seminar with take-home points. Here's what I know: love is not a guarantee against hunger. Secrets don't disappear when you refuse to name them, they grow teeth. And clarity isn't a lightning strike, it's a series of small lamps you turn on, one by one, until you can finally see the room. If you're listening to this with your own heart cracked open, here's what I want you to hear. You are allowed to leave the room where you are being ghosted by the person standing right in front of you. You are allowed to set the picture down. You are allowed to want a life that looks you in the eye. My husband cheated on me with my bridesmaid's husband. That sentence used to feel like a chain. Now it's just a fact in a paragraph I've finished writing. I'm not defined by the worst thing that happened under my roof. I'm defined by the day I packed a bag, made a list, and chose myself. The door I hear now isn't the hotel room. It's mine, opening to a morning I get to build. Keys in my hand, sun on the floor, a quiet I earned.